So I'm delighted to be sitting here with Beth Noveck, one of our wonderful Internet and Society Award winners tonight.
It's an honour.
It's unbelievable in some ways, actually, that we haven't met sooner. I mean, the work that you do is of so much interest to us here, so I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about it.
Likewise.
I guess one of the things that we admire particularly is that you are one of those great academics that manages to function equally well in policy circles as in academic departments. But I wondered if, before we get on to how you do that and how effective that is, whether we could go back to maybe the sort of the origins of your interest in things like open government, because you're a lawyer, aren't you, by training? Is that
I am,
right?
yes, by training.
So how did you get into the whole subject of open government and transformational technology? And
well, actually, in fact, it has its origins here in Oxford.
Right.
I was a member, as they say, of Christ Church, spending a year, as many Americans do. And I was working at that point on a nascent thesis on post-war German culture. And I was interested in the way that the Allies sought to democratize political culture in Germany, and the way in particular that they used media, different sorts of media and cultural media, in order to try to re-democratize German society. This was building on work that I had done previously on the 1920s and the downfall of democracy in Germany and Austria. So I was always captivated by these questions that predated my time as a lawyer of what makes political culture strong, what makes democratic institutions work. And so that's really where the interest stems from. It stems from looking not at how, as many lawyers do, how the internet is regulated or not, or how to prevent censorship of the internet, what we shouldn't do, but rather this question of what we should be doing, using media, in the case, the new media of our day, not the media of that day, to bring about a stronger democratic culture. So that's where the interest stems from, and it grows out of my time here in Oxford.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
There you go.
And clearly one of the things that you're sort of renowned for, books like Wiki Government and so on, is the idea that technology, it opens up government, whether that's about publishing data, whether it's allowing citizens to collaborate in policy making, to respond. It all sounds wonderful, and you're one of the people that's been on the inside as well. How easy is it actually in practice, do you think, to implement?
Well, whether one's on the inside or the outside, you get to, what matters is the results.
Right.
So I think that's a sort of mixed bag in terms of the effectiveness. And that points to the fact that it is very hard to do. Culture change, particularly in large institutions, in large bureaucratic institutions that are bounded by the tradition, not just of cultural practice, but of law that constrains what they can do. Laws that were put in place for the right reasons, in order to protect citizens, in order to safeguard the public interest, in order to create due process, but at the same time today, slow down innovation, make agility difficult, disincentivize experimentation, and essentially have been put in place to safeguard a closed-door, professionalized government culture. So it's hard. I think there have been a lot of successes, some of which are not very visible in a media climate that talks primarily about national security issues, not about the functioning or administration of government. So when you look at national security related issues, I think the balance tilts towards closed rather than open, tilts on the minus side rather than on the plus side. But I think there have been so many advances in terms of better delivery of services, in terms of more transparency about the administration of the civil side of government, shall we say, and about new strategies for solving problems that are collaborative between government and citizens that are ultimately leading to better solutions to problems on a day-to-day and in specific ways.
We talk quite a lot, I think, about the responsibilities of government in this and the sort of cultural shifts that are required, the institutional shifts that are required. What does it mean for citizens, though? I mean, I notice you're doing more work in this area, looking at how citizens can sort of co-produce and collaborate.
Sure. Well, the notion that if government is going to be open, if government's going to put the data out there, the assumption is that somebody's going to take it and run with it and do something with it. And so it's all well and good to put out, for example, spending data and budget data, but that doesn't automatically translate into money saved or fraud reduced or, again, finding places in the budget where either money, again, can be saved or spent differently or innovations can occur. That's going to depend on people shouldering the burden of looking at that data and finding out things to do with it. So the whole idea of open is not so much about open as about co-creation. It's about collaboration and working together. And that requires people to step up, which is a very, I think, different conception of citizenship than we have had before. Previously, our notion of citizenship was of citizens as monitors. We show up at the polls and we vote for our elected officials, and we throw them out if we don't like them. And that has been our job as citizens for the most part. This says something very different. When we open up government data, when we create opportunities for participation, it says that we all have to then participate. It's a much more active conception of citizenship. And that's going to have ripple effects all the way through the education system and every social and cultural institution if we're going to be able to meet that challenge.
And it's at least as demanding, it seems to me, as citizens as it is of government. Really,
Absolutely.
Real change.
Right. And I think it's, but what it does, I think, when done right, is it recognizes that not all citizens have to participate equally or in the same way. So again, the passive conception of voting is that everybody does the same thing. We tick a box on election day, and that's that. In an active conception of citizenship, you and I are not going to want to do the same thing. You may care more about the environment, and I care more about schools. You care more about space policy, and I care more about undersea policy. And the point is we should each be able to do what we choose according to our highest and best use and to give in ways that make sense for who we are, that reflect our talents and experience. And I think it's only if we do that, if we diversify the opportunities for engagement, that people will want to participate. When we force people or have this notion that there is one right way to be a good citizen, then frankly it makes citizenship and civics dull, boring, and burdensome.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we're celebrating you tonight, not just the academic work you've done, but also the policy work. I'm not going to ask you indiscreet questions about being in the White House, but I wondered, what did you take from that experience of being an advisor, and now that you're running GovLab, which I think is very much, it's a think and do tank part of a university, isn't it? It's not just about sort of dry academic research. So what did you bring with you to there?
Well, the best academic research isn't dry, I would hope.
And
done well. It's not dry. And let me just say, I flew across the pond to be here, not simply to get an award, which you would have sent me in the mail, but very much to celebrate and to honor and to thank you for all the work that you're doing here. I've been an admirer from afar, sometimes near, sometimes further away, of the work that's going on here, and the fact that you have so early pioneered studies in this area, serious studies not only of technology, but of technology's impact on government, governing institutions, and on government, have been really among the first and the best to do work in this field. So that's why I am here in person, and not only because I hope that there's a drink awaiting for me after this.
There is most certainly.
Good. I think that to answer the question, though, what I take away is really the importance of doing both, of having, it's one thing to work in this area as opposed to, let's say, I don't know, I won't name a field because I'll only get in trouble. But one of the things I used to say about my time here in Oxford was, in some ways, that I wish I were studying Latin philology or medieval history rather than trying to do contemporary political studies at that point in time. Because it was so wonderful to be in the Bodleian Library and to be a true, I was a student and a scholar, and I wanted to immerse myself in ancient and historic texts. And in fact, when you work in the area of governance or policy or politics, there is ultimately, I think you do that because you want to have an impact on how these institutions run and function. You want to have an impact on what the policies are that get chosen, but in my case, how we make those policies in the first place in ways that engage citizens. So it's a difficult balance. At the one hand, to try to engage with the real world, to have an impact, and at the same time to try to be academically rigorous and to introduce principles of research into what we do. So that's really the mission of the GovLab, is to try to bring evidence and research to governance innovation, so that we're not simply cheerleaders for open government and open data, that we're not only evangelizing, we do our fair share of that, but that we're backing it up with evidence of the ways in which these innovations work to actually solve real problems, improve real people's lives, and when they work and in which contexts they don't. Because ultimately, again, open data, does it translate into cost savings, jobs created, better solutions to problems, more accountability to government, decreased fraud? All of those are questions that have to be proven, that have to be answered with evidence, not simply as a matter of faith. We have to do the hard work of figuring out what works. And so partly that means figuring out ways of doing that kind of work quickly and well in ways that blend the best of academic and scientific principles with real world, urgency and problem solving.
Well, we think you do it immensely well, and your leadership is very inspiring, so we'll have a mutual admiration session tonight. Beth Noveck, it's wonderful to have you here. And to
Thank
talk to
you.
you.
It's a great
so
honor.
much for your
Thank
interview.
you.
Thank you.